So I think we can start. Good afternoon and welcome. It is with great pleasure that I have the honor of introducing this conversation. We will have the privilege to hear two writers and curators who uncovered the unpublished archives of two US lesbian photographers, which shed light on the stories, friendships, and activism stimulated by queer communities in the 1970s and 1980s. Charlotte Flint is currently a senior editor at Phaidon, and she will present her recent book, T.A. Corinne, A Forest Fire Between Us, published with Mac last summer. She has held curatorial positions at the Hayward Gallery, the Barbican, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and has co-developed projects with the Feminist Library, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and University College London. Hélène Giannecchini holds a PhD in literature and published in 2014 a book on Alix Cléo Roubaud that was translated into English in 2023. She published in 2020 a novel, See With Your Own Eyes, and last September, Un désir démesuré d'amitié, which we will discuss today. She will also tell us about the first exhibition of Donna Gottschalk in Europe, which she will curate at Le Bal here in Paris in June 2025. And I think we should start straight away by recounting the story that led to this exciting forthcoming show. So I would like to ask you, Hélène, about the beginnings of your work with Donna Gottschalk. I'm going to show you a photograph. So how did you meet her? Could you tell us about your relationship with her and what struck you most about her pictures, please?
Thank you, Clara. We're going to have a conversation both in French and English, and I'm going to speak in French. But there is a translation if you want. You can ask for it. For the translation, they're going to help you. Yeah. Maybe you can grab. Yeah, they are coming. Pendant que les casques de traduction
While everybody gets their headsets on, I will answer your question, Clara. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here with you and Charlotte today.
Okay.
Right. So, such a pleasure to be here with you today. I met Donna Gottschalk following the advice of a friend, Isabella Fonsi. She is one of the two directors of a gallery in Paris at a time when I was writing a book. This has just come up. It's called Un désir de mesurer l'amitié, the desire to measure friendship. I was looking for photography of everyday life for queer persons. Is the
Okay.
So if we could have some English translation in the earsets, perhaps.
This is the English interpreter testing the English channel, testing
I
1,
Donna,
2, 3.
Isabelle Alfonsi, who is the head of the Marcel Alix Gallery here in Paris. And I was writing a book that just came out. It's literature. There is some picture in it, but it's mostly literature about friendship. And I was looking for pictures of daily life of queer people. It means I was looking for people that have photographed friendship, meals, sleep, and not the night, or also not the political struggle they were in. And these friends told me, you have to look at the photographs of Donna Gottschalk. I never heard of her, and I look on internet and I was amazed. And I was in New York for a few weeks doing research for my book, and I just texted Donna, and she told me, you can come and visit if you want. So I went in a bus for 7 hours straight to Vermont, and I spent 3 days with Donna, and we speak constantly for 3 days. I have now like 30 hours of recording Donna, And she saw me her pictures, her self-portraits, the pictures she made of her friends. And she also told me the story. So Donna is a lesbian photographer born in New York in 49. And she kind of hid her work for a few years. And I decided there was something to do with it because it was amazing. Je sais pas si la traduction remarche maintenant.
I don't know if you can hear the English interpretation now. I think we can speak in French now, should we wish to. Great, so we're back. I'll let you ask the next question, but it all sort of came about by chance and by friendship. I received this advice, I followed it, I like to work in this way. When I discovered Donna's work, I told myself immediately that this was something I'd never really seen before. The lives that she had photographed were so precious. So I wanted to showcase it.
I would like to ask Charlotte the same question. So could you please let us know how you discovered Tia Corinne's work and why you decided these photographs mattered and deserved more visibility, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, a lot of what you just said, Hélène, really echoes my own sort of journey with the work. So about 5 years ago, I was working with the Feminist Library in London, which is an incredible collection from the women's liberation movement. They're still actively collecting all materials kind of related to ongoing protests, but then they've got an extraordinary collection of books and lots of photo books. And their artist in residence, Minna Hauke, was showing me some of her kind of favorite things in the collection. And one of them is this image that we see in front of us. And I'd never seen anything like it. I thought it was absolutely extraordinary. I couldn't place it. It felt both contemporary. It also felt quite timeless. And the more I looked at it, the more I kind of fell in love with this, incredible sort of mystical world that she was creating in her photographs. Like Hélène, I hadn't heard of Corinne beforehand, and it was kind of this one chance encounter with a photograph in a library dedicated to sort of celebrating and safeguarding women and queer people's voices that took me on this journey. So it really was a kind of very fortuitous meeting. I always say that her work found me rather than I found it. And it sort of found me at a point in my life where I was really kind of ready and willing and excited to take this journey with someone. And from that, I just started, kind of went down the rabbit hole, as it were, and started doing more and more research and found out that her archives were held by the University of Oregon, where she bequeathed her entire archive. They have more than 350 boxes of material. It's extraordinary. And when T passed away, part of the kind of gift of the archive to the university was that each year there would be a funded travel opportunity for a researcher to go and look at the materials. So I encourage everyone to apply for that. It's a fantastic initiative, which I applied for, and that was my first trip to the archive, which kind of began this entire journey.
You were both confronted with a wealth of material and the difficult responsibility of weaving together the corresponding stories, which include the lives of many other figures that cross the path of each photographer. So perhaps you could both tell us how you navigated this material and the stories of the people involved. Hélène, as you said, you spent a lot of time talking with Donna, learning about all the persons she had photographed over the years in order to recover these forgotten narratives. Perhaps I can show you more photos here, for instance.
Oui, c'est intéressant ce que dit Charlotte.
Yes, what Charlotte says is really interesting. It's about going to Oregon and looking at the archives in terms of Donna. I wasn't able to do this. I worked at her home where she had conserved her archive. These items still needed to be triaged and there could be a place to host researchers to look at this material. This isn't the case yet. One thing that I did for Donna before I even thought of the exhibition was to bring out all of the negatives. Donna then asked me to bring them back to France, to clean them up, to number them, to set up some boards so that everything could be accessible. This is what is ideal, really, to allow researchers to see all of this material. Right now, we're just at the beginning of the process. Donna, at the beginning, she said, I'm a working class dyke. That's what she said, and the people that I photographed, often they die two deaths. They're forgotten twice over. They're killed by capitalism, by the patriarchy, and they are then forgotten because they're queer, they're marginalized, and they're poor. Most persons that she photographed are dead, died very young, around the age of 40. Now, what's important for them is, or for her, is to really show these lives, not just that they existed, but that they really had a life, which she told me about. And this is what's exceptional in Donna's work. She photographs people sometimes over 20, 30, even 40 years. And so these are not just portraits, they almost destinies, fates in the sociological sense of the term that are being revealed. And so behind me we have her sister Mary. She photographed her from the age of 15 until she died. Mary died at the age of 45, more or less, in California. Now, Donna told me, well, it's almost like we had a sort of a contract. She said, you're a writer, I'm a photographer. I'll show you my photos and I'll tell you all of the stories behind my photos, and then it's your turn to tell these stories. I took this mission really seriously. And I put together all of this information. I interviewed, sometimes I did complementary research to try and recreate and to make these destinies as traceable as possible. Otherwise, they would have been sacrificed. Here you see Marlene, that was Donna's best friend. She met her in New York. Marlene arrived in New York in her 20s, and there was abuse and a history of violence in her family. She arrived in New York. She had nowhere to go. She went to a lesbian bar, and the bartender said, there's a girl with an apartment. She takes in any lesbian who has nowhere to sleep. Go there. She knocked on the door, and this was Donna. Now, Marlene's story is representative of the destiny of a woman, I believe, of a lesbian who comes from a poorer class in the States, and then she died dramatically. She died in the streets, homeless. She was 50 years old from a cancer that she chose not to treat. Now, I believe that Donna's photographs allow us to tell this story.
So Charlotte, in the case of T.A. Corinne, we're also faced with a story encompassing much more than one individual, as it involves an entire community. These photographs tend to circumvent the classic hierarchies of masterpieces and authorship, as they often involve a creative group with the photography of others and the Blatant Image magazine. We have a copy here, for instance. So could you tell us, please, about these collective adventures and how does your book reflect them?
Of course. First things, I'm so sorry my translation's not working, so I couldn't understand what you said there. Maybe if someone could come and have a look at this, if you don't mind, in a second. But in the meantime, to your question, Clara, yeah, so community was at the heart of absolutely everything T did. It was something that when she grew up in the south of in Southern America, in Florida, and she moved to San Francisco as a young woman when she was sort of in her late 20s. She was married to a man, and they'd had this loving, wonderful relationship. She'd had relationships with women in the past, but it wasn't until she moved to San Francisco and found herself in the heart of this incredible lesbian, feminist, sex-positive community there that she felt able to fully embrace her identity as a gay woman. And she described the process of living in San Francisco as a coming out process. And it was very much the kind of crucible in which she forged her identity as an artist, as an activist, as a sex educator, and as a lesbian. And she had relationships with many women who she said kind of taught her about life and the work that she wanted to make. And a big part of that was that there was a lot of kind of collaborative art making. So you can see here, this is a collage that was made by Honey Lee Cottrell, who was one of T's girlfriends. And the two of them sort of, T described that the first time they started making work together was the first time she started making work that self-consciously read as lesbian. She wanted to kind of find a visual language that she felt celebrated and spoke truly of the love that she had between her and Honey and with the community of women around them. So San Francisco was one kind of really key area where she was working as part of a community where kind of her art making came to the fore. There's a really funny anecdote where she produced something in the early 70s called the Cunt Colouring Book, which was line drawings of women's vulvas. And here you can see there was a colouring book party where she invited women who had the drawings of them in the book to come and colour in the book collectively. And so this kind of collective being together was kind of like an integral part of the art making, really. And after about 10 years in San Francisco, she moved to Southern Oregon, where there was a burgeoning back to the land movement, and there were lots of women's only lands. And there was this absolutely incredible series of DIY photographic workshops called the Feminist Photography Ovulas. Ovula, not seminar, wanted to move away from semen being the root word. And they held these every year for 5 years. And they were these incredible collective gatherings, you know, in the rural Oregon woodlands, in these hand-built kind of huts where they had a makeshift photographic darkroom and they were teaching each other photography. It was just absolutely extraordinary. And a lot of it was about community and coming together, learning from one another. And it was such a kind of democratic way of making images. And I think a lot of the women, when I was in the archives in Oregon, I was lucky enough to read some of the feedback forms that some of the participants at the Ovulas filled out. And they were saying that it gave them such a confidence in kind of making photographs in a medium that was kind of quite macho, quite male dominated. And it kind of, a lot of them felt that they were part of something so much bigger. So these are, so here's a photograph that T took. This was the second photography Ovula. And they were just absolutely incredible. They would have like a timetable of events throughout the week where it would be everything from learning about the kind of four mothers of photographic history through to how to create a model release form, through to how to photograph in crowds, how to make erotic photography. And it just seemed to be this kind of real coming together of lots of meetings and minds. And lots of the participants described it as really transformative.
I'm having trouble with the, the slideshow, sorry. Yes, this sense of belonging to a community that is often written off the main narrative is also a central theme of your recent book, Hélène, Un désir démesuré d'amitié, which pays tribute to the overlooked but powerful bonds of kinship fostered within queer, lesbian, and gay communities. In this book, you included photographs by Donna Gottschalk, as well as found snapshots by anonymous authors. And the corresponding stories could not be retrieved, so you chose to imagine possible narratives, delving into the potential of fiction to give new life to these forgotten people. So could you tell us about this decision and your poetic engagement with the archival materials? Perhaps we could start with the first of such photographs in your book, please.
Yes.
Absolutely. So as a writer, we might need to specify that I write using images. I base my work on images to develop this idea where we use pictures as a sort of a reservoir, but we also try and provide those who are photographed with these possible lives. Indeed, there's a chapter on Donna Gottschalk. So here I just talked of my meeting with her. I also plan for a new book on Donna where I can talk about her multiple lives. I think you really need a bigger book for this. There will also be a catalogue for the exhibition prepared with Julie Hérault. In my book, I began by collecting photographs, amateur photographs that I found in antique markets that I bought for just a few cents. Sometimes that's all that's left of a life. And then I wonder how, based on these photographs, we could tell a story of a potential probable life of a person. This photography that you see, it opens the book. I found it in Paris in the 19th arrondissement. And these are two men in an embrace. I tried to date the photo. It's the backpack that enabled me to do so. This photo was taken post-Second World War. And so I wondered, what does it mean to be 25 or 30 years old after the Second World War and to be gay? What were their lives like of these two men? What about in 1942 when they strengthened laws that criminalized homosexuality? How did that come across to them? What was it like for homosexuality to be categorized as a mental pathology at the time? I tried to imagine a life based on this photograph. There might be something left of these two lives, but this is all that I have. And I'm really touched by this beautiful text by Foucault, the lives of these infamous men. This is the preface of a book that he actually never wrote. It was the beginning of a project where he wanted to work using these texts about people who were locked up to do with sodomy. Mr. So-and-so is in the countryside and we don't know why. We just had these vestiges of explanations as to why people were arrested, and he collected these phrases and he planned to use these to write about all of these lives, people who were then committed. Now I want to do something similar, and I want to talk about the possible stories, these possible life stories, otherwise they'll disappear. Yes, I could show other examples of this photography. This is a picture on memories of sexuality. It's in Marseille, where there are some archives. This is an album that a man made of his lovers, very systematically. You can admire the precision of the work. There are others, and I asked myself a lot of questions, and I did wonder why, as a French person, I've gone so much to the States to find these stories. It's so paradoxical because in Donna's work, I found something that I was missing in terms of representation in my own life. This begs work. It was interesting to go into the archive to speak to Donna. This is the question that I've been asking myself rather often. Many of us have asked the question, why must we cross an ocean to find images that speak to us and speak of us? It's an interesting question to ask.
Thank you. The politics of visibility and the radical power of friendship also underpin T.A. Corinne's work. Charlotte, in your book, you write, so I'm quoting Charlotte, while T's photographs are erotic, joyous, and sensual, they are also inherently political. So could you please explain how Corinne used photographs to highlight hidden stories, circumventing stereotypes, to turn images into empowerment tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So the entire kind of process of making this book and doing this research I really tried to be very much led by T's voice. You know, it's interesting hearing Hélène talk, you know, that you were able to speak with Donna, and that's of course not something I was able to do with this project. So I basically tried to read everything I could possibly find that T had written. And she self-published her own autobiography, which there is a copy of in the archive. And that has been one of the most kind of informative tools in helping sort of shape my journey. And I've also tried to kind of follow this thread of her voice through the process. So a big part of kind of getting to know her, I guess, was thinking, you know, she was kind of an absolutely incredible photographer. And where did that come from? So kind of tracing like her sort of the history of her photograph making. So she started making photographs when she was studying her master's degree in Brooklyn. And she wasn't really taught about it as a fine art as such. She was kind of taught to view it more as a way of like art and politics being brought together. And it was more of a tool. And, you know, she'd grown up, like I say, in the American South, and she was active during the civil rights movement. Photography was kind of this tool that had been used, you know, and still is today, of course, as an enormous tool for lots of liberation movements and protest. So it seemed that she had kind of associated photography with that. So it was almost always imbued with a kind of political energy. And she returned to photography, and she sort of manipulated the medium and photographic techniques like solarization to her own ends, which were both a way of being erotic, beautiful, joyous photographs, but also, like I said, you know, inherently political. So she was solarizing these photographs. We might go back to one of the solarized ones in a second, but where the body, she describes that she loved the sort of, here, for example, the one that was on the Sinister Wisdom, this is on a magazine cover. She described the solarization technique as, number one, being very beautiful. She loved the way it kind of made bodies look lit from within. She talked about her photographs wanting to effectively capture that sexual rush, and she felt that solarization did that. But on the other hand, it was also a very kind of self-conscious technique of keeping her subjects safe, because it meant that you couldn't identify the people in the photographs. So it was, you know, so that's kind of that flip side of that dual, both kind of erotic, passionate, powerful, but also political. And coming back to this poster, this was the third issue of Sinister Wisdom, which was a lesbian periodical. And she had her photograph on the third issue, like I say, and it was really, really popular. And they wrote to her and asked to make it into a poster. And when she initially tried to publish this photograph, she had written to submit it to an it was called something like a sexual atlas of the world. And the editor declined this photograph and said that one woman's hair was too short, one woman's breasts were too long, and basically didn't want to publish it. It was kind of a very sort of derogatory response. And her response was, I'm going to make that photograph famous. And it was through turning it into a poster and a magazine cover that it then kind of circumvented this sort of more sort of misogynist approach to the reaction that she had to this very photograph, and became something that was kind of in the forefront of like this lesbian feminist community and consciousness. And when she was making photographs, then she was often putting them on magazine covers, in books, and she was very interested in how these things circulated and reached far more people. So photography was always a kind of, she sort of looked to it as a bit of a tool, I think, and a bit like the Blatant Image, the magazine that you've got here. This was published out of the Feminist Photography Ovulas. They made 3 copies of it. It was a male submission magazine, and they were actively seeking submissions from women who felt that they weren't represented in photography, and it's the most extraordinary collection. So I urge you to come and have a look after this if you want to.
Thank you. Are there some photographs you would like to comment here, perhaps? Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and coming back to the ovulas, so these are a series of photographs that were made during the workshops, as I said, in this sort of, they had this makeshift barn. And this, I think, was one of the sessions when they were looking at kind of how to make erotic photography. And yeah, I mean, there was always something kind of, the first thing about it for me is that they're so joyous. And I was reading a lot of things at the time of making this book about how joy can be this kind of radical revolutionary act. You know, there's been lots of amazing recent writing about it, like Adrienne Marie Brown's Pleasure Activism, Radical Intimacy by Sophie K. Rosa. And there was I think there was just this resurgence of kind of scholarship and interesting writing looking at how this celebratory, joyous kind of how social justice can be the most enjoyable, pleasurable experience in the world. And I think for me, that really spoke to what they were trying to capture in these workshops, which, you know, they were women who had often been pushed to the fringes of their communities, weren't, you know, not all the women who attended these sessions identified as lesbian, but those who did were often, you know, frequently marginalized. And it just felt to me that this kind of, this foregrounding of love and lust and joy and the erotic and the body was in itself such a political act. And I think that the circulation of these images in these kind of periodicals and posters and things like that was, again, just kind of bringing it further and further into public conscious. And also they were very actively trying to reach women who had who were marginalized. So there was a big focus on them reaching women who were living in rural communities. You know, I talked about the community in San Francisco, which is, of course, you know, like a big sort of bustling city, but there were queer communities of women living in sort of very rural areas who had no connection to a community, and they wanted to reach those women. And they also wanted to ensure that they were presenting and celebrating all bodies. You know, they didn't want to be reproducing this kind of images of lesbians were taken by men for male consumption. They wanted to be kind of celebrating all bodies, women of color, working class women, disabled women. And that was something that was kind of very self-consciously sort of her raison d'etre, really, was like to put these women in the frame and to celebrate them. And this is one of my favorite photographs of all time. So this is a photograph taken by Joan E. Byron, who also knew Donna very well and is an extraordinary photographer. And Joan took this photograph during one of the ovular sessions. I think this might have been the Erotic Photography Workshop 101. And yeah, I mean, I can't stop laughing whenever I see it. I'm like, look how joyous and wonderful and celebratory this is. And I think then they were also kind of having discussions about when they were photographing women who were naked, they would also want to be naked. And it was very much about fostering this sense of kind of comfort and inclusivity. And something I think that really resonates across Donna and T is that they were so committed to making their collaborators comfortable. And a lot of the things that the feedback from people who were photographed by T is that it felt like the first time they were ever seen. And I think that's something that really speaks to Donna's work as well, is that in itself, the photograph is this reflection of you in a world that's trying to make you disappear.
Thank you. Hélène, in your book, Un désir démesuré d'amitié, you invent a different level of engagement with the archives that is also both intimate and political, to quote the celebrated feminist motto. And your personal and fictional journey may resonate with the experiences of your readers. It invites us to celebrate the many, many bonds of friendship that define our lives and also to value their political import. You recount how you traveled to various queer archives. Could you tell us how this lived experience of going through the files shaped your understanding and your sense of belonging to a broader history, please?
Oui, moi j'ai une passion pour les lieux d'archives. Je trouve ça passionnant d'aller dans des lieux et de voir comment est-ce qu'ils sont pensés,
places and see how they are thought, how you access them. I went to the lesbian archives, the memory of sexuality, many other places, in Saint-Germain-la-Blanchère, the Memory Fund for France, New York, Gay Lesbian Bi Society in San Francisco, with the idea that I would have my own history. Part of my history was not told to me, and I wanted to look for it. I think family stories are fictions. I felt free, so I think I'm free to choose who is my family. So I quite freely wandered there, opened boxes, looked for images, and it's really fantastic. In an archive, I remember one day in San Francisco, I opened a box and there was a wig. It was an archive of a drag queen who had given everything, the photographs and everything else. So it's things you wear. And with Donna, I try and make her archive. I brought to France for the exhibition all the publications, feminist publications to which she participated. I cleaned the negatives, scanned many things. She was also part of the Gay Liberation Front, one of the first organizations created after Stonewall for homosexuals. And they gathered in a church, the Church of the Holy Apostles. They had a business card, and she kept from the Gay Liberation on which she wrote the phone number of a girl she was picking up. So I now think about the first issue of Come Out. It's really difficult to find them in a good state. Well, Donna, she cut on the cover the head of a girl she liked to put it in her wallet. So I like this dimension of the archive, and I would like to show it and find means. We are currently thinking about it with BAL. How can we keep these traces alive? To come back to your question, well, the word, an important word, it's the notion of kinship. In French, we do not have a word for that. It would be parenthood, or kinship is what links you to other people. How can you be linked to other people? What bond can you invent? And in a sense, today, I feel more bonded to Donna than to some people in my family. It is true, Charlotte, you're right. She's alive. She's lively. And we exchange every other day on Messenger. We wrote about the election. I ask her news about her dogs. You never have to forget about the photographs. What do you think about the contrasts? And it's fascinating. It's included in life. It's not separated from life. I had the impression that paradoxically she made images that changed something in my life. I met images that were lacking. That's why I think they are particularly valuable.
I think this echoes also what you wrote in your text. So I'm going to quote you again. So I'm quoting Charlotte. So often, evidence of the lives of groups facing oppression is destroyed or buried. For queer people whose very existence is under threat, the act of collecting and celebrating LGBTQ plus histories is a revolutionary act, an act of love. And your text is written in the first person singular. It departs from the conventions of traditional catalog essays. So could you tell us about this decision, the urgency to recover these histories, but also the attempt to find different ways of sharing them, which is something that Hélène also did clearly?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, firstly, when I talk about her, I call her T. I've never called her Corinne. I feel a bit like, Hélène, you've built this beautiful relationship with Donna. I feel like I know T better than some people in my life, and this is someone I've never met. And it's been through this research and this journey that I've sort of built this relationship with this person who I felt her work found me at a really key moment in my life. And it was such an emotional kind of connection. It spoke to me so vividly, like I can't explain it, grabbed me and hasn't let me go. I hope it doesn't ever. So when I wrote the essay, it felt uncomfortable to call her Corinne. And you know, sort of working as a curator and an editor, your sort of role as a writer, role there is to kind of be invisible. You know, you're there to sort of uplift and celebrate the voice of whoever you're writing about or curating an exhibition about. And it felt that this project and the book that resulted from it was such a personal journey that between the two of us that I actually kind of broke with my usual way of writing and, you know, spoke to her and used I in there, which felt quite uncomfortable. Like, truthfully, it was not really something I'd ever been encouraged to do, but it felt like the only way I could write that essay was to speak to her. And I remember when I was kind of preparing for it, I was writing letters to her because it felt like a way of kind of thinking about thinking through my relationship with her. And like I say, I always kind of followed her voice. And yeah, so I think I feel very connected to her in a really special way. And I think that has shaped the book because I wanted the book to feel like a kind of an intimate reflection on the work that she made, on the lives that she touched. And then I kind of balanced it in a way by also, at the end of the book, there's a very extensive chronology of her life, which is more like a kind of historical document where I kind of tracked through her life, and we do use Corinne there. So it is kind of different registers, but I sort of wanted my voice to sit alongside others in her life. You know, I've been lucky enough to republish a letter from Joni Byron in the book, who also wrote a contemporary reflection. So I think I just wanted my voice to be part of the kind of chorus responding to hers. I didn't want it to be something kind of authoritative in the way that, you know, I'm just joining in this conversation. And I think also, I hope that speaks to the sort of generosity and multiplicity of voices that are celebrated in these incredible archives. You know, I feel such a debt of gratitude to be people who sort of celebrate and safeguard these histories. And, you know, now more than ever, I think it really is important that we're kind of making sure that these histories that are so often destroyed, pushed to the fringes, are being celebrated. It just feels more vital than ever. And I mean, even in T's own sort of life and work, the archive and the idea of a kind of publicly accessible history was the sort of thing that drove her entire practice. She said, you know, not having access to an accessible history is a devastating form of oppression. It feels like there is no history. There was never a lesbian in the past. And she kind of wanted to always think of her work as kind of contributing to this ongoing visual history. And I really admired that. And even the fact that the archive, that there's a kind of a research trip built into it that was her decision. You know, there was such a generous idea of kind of keeping these histories safe and encouraging people to engage with them. And another thing, you know, I quote her so much because she was the most amazing speaker and writer. And she talked a lot about how often kind of queer histories are a bit scrappy, quite ephemeral. You know, they've not been treated with the same sort of attention, care, generosity that some histories have. And she was really hoping that people would come back to these more ephemeral histories and, you know, grab hold of them and make sure that they aren't forgotten.
Thank you. So we have some more photographs to share that you may wish to comment, and we can also go backwards because we passed over some of them quickly. So that's up to you. And I'm also using the time we have left in case there are things you would like to add, things that matter to you, you'd like to share with the audience. So here are some other photographs. Yeah.
Je voudrais juste réagir à ce que Charlotte a dit sur cette histoire d'avoir un passé.
On the history of having a past or not having a past. I think indeed that the scarcity of traces of queer history, the fact that it's difficult to access, or and the fact that it requires for you to dedicate yourself to it, not to access it, lessens us. Not to have a history is also a losing strength. I think about John Nethel that writes about it in the Hysteric and Associate publisher. What is having a history and what power does it give to you? The archives, well, someone has to dedicate themselves to it. I dedicated myself to Donna, sometimes in a mad way. It's a work that goes well beyond an exhibition, a book. We work for years on that. And you have to believe in it. And you are more or less supported in that journey. If you find your archive, it's also true what Charlotte said. Well, it's very often the case, actually, for works that reappear. There is someone behind that has worked intensively to bring them to life again. For Donna, I wanted to say that it was important to listen to her. It's quite delicate. Well, Donna for a long time did not want to show her work. She didn't want people that she photographed be submitted to violence and abuse. So she criticizes visibility. Being visible is also being available or being a victim of violence. She wanted to keep this until today, and she thought that if she dies today, well, the photographs will disappear with her. Very often it is said that Donna is a lesbian photograph. She photographed gay people, but that's not what Donna says. And that's also very important to pay attention to re-give the track of the works. She was born in a very poor neighborhood. She was born in a beauty salon of her mother. And she was looking at the women who came to be hairdressed, or she also witnessed the people who went and looked for the coffees. I photograph Alphabet City, which is a poor neighborhood of New York, so that queer people, lonely women, Puerto Rican families find themselves. First of all, it's a neighborhood, and the way different marginal populations converge there. And I realized when I looked at her negatives that a certain number of photos were set aside because we were looking for portraits, but the path of Donna is important to be shown because you put it back in the neighborhood of New York and to link it to other populations and other historical and sociological realities. So you have to be very cautious. Okay, Donna is said to have photographed this. Does she say it is true? And I go very slowly because I want to make sure I'm not having the work saying something it doesn't say.
Or photographs you would like to comment? I'm sorry. Is there something you would like to add or photographs you would like to comment? Because we've been passing over the slides very quickly. So there may be a picture you would want to go back to, or final words, my ideas that matter to you that you want to stress, perhaps.
Well, yeah, I just mean it's such a joy to be having this conversation. So thank you both so much. And it's just, I find it quite a moving and emotional thing to just see these photographs kind of interspersed together and kind of the different roles that they would have played. I was trying to work out if Donna and T knew each other. I don't know if you've ever come across anything.
I'm not sure.
No, because there's a really comprehensive list, because T also took a lot of portraits. So she was quite often photographing writers, artists, photographers. And I was looking through that to see if I could find Donna's name. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I feel like they must have, been aware of each other. And then this is just kind of sending me on this other thing of like, oh, maybe it's another archival journey that we're both going to end up going down. And but yeah, it just feels really special to see these photographs here and to be having this conversation about the importance of archives and spaces and the custodians of these sort of like repositories of memory, And I think it's something that you can see a lot in the fair and the selection of work, is this kind of celebration of people who have been overlooked, or either on purpose or not. And it just feels really great that this is part of that conversation.
Yes, thank you. So thank you so much for your thorough commitment, thought-provoking work, for sharing with us these much needed and inspiring stories. And perhaps there are some questions in the audience, or yes, thank you, Marie. Thank you.
Bonjour. Ça marche.
Yes, it works. Tell the lady it works. We can hear her. Yes, she has to. Yes, it's working. Hello, Marie Daucher. I'm a photographer. I would like to thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to add something. When you talk about history, I had the opportunity to work with 50 lesbians to make portraits in 2022. There is a book that came out of there, but I only had 2 references of books made on lesbians. Johnny Byron, and you talked about it, and Zanemi Muroli, who's a South African photographer. It's the only 2 references, and without these references, I wouldn't have been able to do that work. After a conference, I had published another book in March. So last week, I was doing research on Jeb, and I came across a book, a photograph on blatant image that I translated, and I hope I will be able to publish it, where she talks about what I experienced 40 years afterwards. To be naked, if I take a picture of someone who is naked. And all these practices, if I had had as a lesbian photographer the text of Jeb, I would have won 40 years. And this is not taught in art schools. I will make sure it is translated and disseminated. But what is astonishing is that from this distance in time and in kilometers, we do not work in the same countries, is to have the same practices. There is not a gene of homosexual photograph or lesbian photograph, but we have the same positions. It's very touching. So the image of naked photographers is very interesting. These common practices, and photography is a domination tool, and I think lesbians make it a history and friendship tool. Maybe we have the time for another question.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation.
My question actually is for Hélène. I'm a queer writer of queer histories of photography, and I'm curious how you kind of determine the anonymous photographs. You know, their origins, their context. I know you said one was the backpack, but is there a sort of, were there inscriptions on the back of them that you perhaps come across, or something that kind of confirms that these women or these men are gay?
If they are gay, can you say again the last word? If they are gay or
That
not?
they're gay or lesbian or trans or anything like that.
Yeah, parfois j'ai des. It's okay, it's translation or?
Yes, there is a translation, yes.
Ça dépend.
It depends. I have photographs where there's nothing at the back. For some photographs, there is it's written "For my love" and a name, and sometimes there's nothing at the back of the photograph. There was nothing, and it raises issues. What's happening in this photograph? Are they queer or not? Sometimes they go to people who sell queer photographs. You have women who have trans, queer people, or people who are just disguised. I had a conversation with them. Sometimes there are signs and you see it's different, but sometimes I feel it. But it's really thin. When I do not have a proof, I let them aside.
All right. So thank you all, and thank you to the audience here. There are many familiar faces. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. You will find Hélène's and Charlotte's books here at the fair, and also Mary's book, Et l'amour aussi, probably. And I think we all look forward to the next steps of your projects, in particular the forthcoming Donna Gottschalk exhibition at Le Bal. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you doing? Nice to meet you.